Oh, great. Hello, everyone. For some reason, my screen no longer works. Here we go. It was the wrong scene that I selected, apparently. Perfect. All right, so let's talk about, I think this one we said we want to couple first. All right, Fred, the stage is yours.
All right, so if you scroll down, Nemo, towards the bottom, not quite the bottom,
yeah,
a little up a little more. Still up toward. I have a proposal post that's been updated with the newest changes.
I see.
So here it is. All right. So the last time we talked about the proposal to add new APIs for span and for slicing. We decided, I just lost, oh, okay, never mind. So last time we decided that we liked the idea in principle, but that there were some concerns about overload resolution. Specifically, the concerns result from the APIs that are add range, insert range, and remove range, as well as, no, I think those were it. Add range, insert range, remove range. And so the problem is we have overloads today that take an IEnumerable, and we have overloads today that, and if we were to add an overload that took a span, you have two areas of concern. Area of concern number one is when you have an immutable array of any t, doesn't matter what the t is, and you try to add range a array, because array has an implicit conversion to both read-only span and to IEnumerable. So in both of those cases, those overloads would be equally applicable, and thus there would be an ambiguity. You also have a problem when you have an immutable array of char, and you try to add range a string, because that is again convertible to both IEnumerable of char and read-only span of char. So we talked about that a bit offline, and the proposal is to rename those APIs. So the current way that those APIs are named is add range from span, insert range from span, and remove range from span. And I believe the questions that we need to answer today are basically just bike shedding. Particularly the from span prefix or postfix, it kind of doesn't work great for remove range from span, for example. Are you removing are you removing the immutable array range from the span, or are you removing the range of the span from the immutable? Like what are you doing there? I'm not sure. So yeah, that's the question we need to answer today. What should the name of this be?
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I think from range made sense when we talk insert. You could also say with span. That would probably work for both insert and remove. That wouldn't be terrible. I mean, I think one person, and let me actually scroll down, like suggested like an IntelliSense feature, right? But like we don't have these things today, and even then, if we had them, I'm not sure that that's, actually always great, because even if it works in IntelliSense, you still have this, the issues when people just look at docs or other places where the APIs are presented. And I will say that, it's really hard to beat the simplicity of an alphabetic sort, right? So if things that are related show up, in proximity to each other, it generally tends to work better. But yeah, I'm not gung-ho about the name from span or with span. It's just, if you could come up with something that is a suffix, I think that would be better.
I mean, we could do remove all.
Let me actually look at that in context.
I mean, my other suggestion had been add span, insert span, remove span. But that is again not a suffix of add range. And so the concern, if I remember correctly, Emo, is that you want, when I type insert range, you want to be able to see the span version as well.
Yeah, I mean, because I don't know, add range is such a common name that I think people will expect to add a collection by just showing, looking for add range. And if there's no overload, then they will be confused. And the nice thing with the suffix is that even if you type add range, the other thing still shows up. If it's a completely different name, then yes, if I just look at all the members of a mutable array, I might be able to select the other one by name. But then the question is that how people work? I would expect most people to just dot into it and immediately start typing add range. And if that filters it down to just things that have add range in it. And so the other one would just disappear, and then people would be very confused, or would just conclude that, yeah, you just can't do it with a span. And then just write a for loop themselves. That would be my expectation.
The other thing to consider is that for spans, at least, we have as span as a thing that exists on immutable arrays already. And so perhaps the span, like just saying add span, remove span, insert span, is in line with as span as well.
Oh, you mean the as span suffix? So you would say add range as span?
No, I was just saying add span.
Oh, I see.
Right, is because it's like, we have the as span API, and now we have the add span API, and we have the
So we only have a problem with using add range and to immutable array on and such on things that are equally implicitly read-only span and IEnumerable, right?
That's correct.
And user-defined conversions do or don't matter here.
They do, because the conversion from string to read-only span is a user-defined conversion.
And that has equal priority in overload ambiguity binding?
Yep. Yeah, so the problem is we can't, if it were just the array, let me cover the other options that we could do. If it were just the array overload, right? If that was the only thing that mattered, we could just add an add range of an array, and then that would just resolve the ambiguity because it would have a most specific overload. The problem comes when you have string, because string is equally convertible to both of these things, and we don't have generic specialization in C#. So we can't have an immutable array of char specifically providing an add range of string that correctly handles this thing. So the other option we could take is we could define add range that takes a span as an extension method on perhaps the partial immutable array class.
Well, actually, we do have generic specialization for custom members, which is an extension method on the specific generic
right, no,
instantiation.
That's what I was saying.
Well, we don't need add range span as an extension method onto an immutable array. We can do add range string on a mutable array of char.
No, that would not work. Because it would be ambiguous between the two existing add ranges, and overload resolution would just stop looking.
Okay, this is a degenerate case of the thing that we have already found to be successful. Okay. Like we only have two string on, or we have some special methods on read-only span of char because they're string-like, and those are specialized via extension methods, but that's a net new method, not a special overload.
Yeah, so. You can't overload via extension methods and expect it to magically resolve ambiguity problems. So okay. we could just define add range as an extension method, that add a range that takes a span as an extension method. The problem with that is that if you just pass an array to this thing, that will mean that the IEnumerable will get chosen, because that is the point of doing it on an extension method is as an extension method is to provide a ranking, basically,
right?
Where the instance method will get chosen.
But we could just have the overload of add range that takes the T array and that calls the add span or whatever, right?
We could.
So I mean that one would be easier to solve. I think the string one is still the harder one.
Yeah, the string is the problem.
It's also the more rare one probably, but still. It should just work.
Yeah, definitely. I can't remember the last time I used an immutable array of char, much less tried to add a string to one. But
yeah. Add range a string to one.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. So I mean, we could also take the other route, right? We could just say, look, this is rare enough, and so for the full people that have that, they now have to cast. Tough luck.
We could, but it's a source-breaking change.
Agreed. Like but it's a source-breaking change only, right? So that's what I'm saying. If you believe it's rare enough, maybe that's okay.
Just to give you an example of my experience with something similar to this is that in Roslyn we have a type called array builder, which is effectively a pooled immutable array of tbuilder. Mm-hmm. And we have an add range that takes an IEnumerable, and I tried to add an add range that takes a span before, and I encountered a break in Roslyn somewhere in a bit of VB code was trying to do this this array thing, and that broke. So it might be rarish, but I'm not certain that it really is.
Well, but so let's say I encounter this. How hard is the fix, and how hard do we think a user would have to think about it to apply the fix? Like, it seems relatively straightforward. You just have to cast, right? And then you're probably good to go.
The shortest fix would be .as span on the string.
Yeah, depending on which direction you want to go, yeah.
Yeah. Maybe it would depend on users understanding overload resolution, which is always a problem.
Yeah, like to me, the bar isn't like it will always compile, right? The bar is more like, okay, if I have this issue of how many places in my code base do I have to touch up, and how hard is the fix, right? If it's 1 or 2 places and the fix is trivial, and we believe it's rare enough, then that's okay. If we believe almost everybody is hitting that, then it's clearly not okay, right? Like that's why I'm saying, to me it kind of feels, I mean, the array one clearly, right? I mean, arrays happen all the time. Strings with collections with chars seems, yes, I've written code like this, but most of the code was, sample code somewhere, right? Like it's not production code usually. So I'm wondering how many people will actually have that issue in practice.
So to make sure that I'm understanding clearly, Emo, you're suggesting that we do the add range, just add range that takes a span, and then additionally add ranges that take an array, so that we resolve the common ambiguity,
Yes.
and say that the string ambiguity or any other ambiguity that results from a user-defined type where they have both a string, where they convert both to enumerable and read-only span, that's an acceptable break, is what I'm hearing.
That is my suggestion, because I can't think of another case where you commonly have a conversion. I mean, it would have to be logically a collection type, right? And so the vast majority of them are provided by us, right? So we don't really have collections today that implicitly convert to read-only span. The only thing we really have is string. So like that's why I'm wondering how many places you can actually be hit by. And it seems like string is the only case, string and arrays, right? And for arrays, we often already have overlaps anyway. And so I feel like that seems like the easier fix, maybe.
I mean, it seems reasonable to me.
Does anybody have any other concerns around breaks?
No, I think that's it. I'll trust Fred that user-defined conversions are in the same tier as interface conformance. I thought user-defined was a separate wave, which would have made this easier. I mean, it would make it wrong, because we'd want the span one more than the enumerable one, but
it would make it easier, wouldn't it?
But can you go back to the C#3 language spec and fix that for us, Fred?
If I had a time machine to go back in time, I think I have bigger things on my mind than this corner case of overload resolution. Maybe getting generics in V1. Single nullable type for everything.
Discriminated unions. Oh, sorry, too soon. We don't have them yet.
Yeah.
Yeah, for a sense of scale here, I finally got the data. It looks like our NuGet.org scan the last time it ran, 0.7% used a mutable array of t at all. And none of them, or there were 0 hits for add range of enumerable, and there were epsilon hits for add range of another immutable array. So I don't think we're talking a lot of conflict here. Similarly on remove.
Well, as long as we have the common case add range for array, it seems fine to me.
Yep. On the builder, we have the params array, which I think is all that we need for add at least.
Add range. So it's not add, it's add range.
Right. Add range params t array
Okay.
items.
As long as it takes a params t, then that's fine. We could consider making the add range on immutable array params as well if we wanted to. Though that might... Would that cause potential issues? Probably not.
Do we have param span yet?
Not yet.
All right.
And the proposal did suggest that param span would be allowed when you also have params int or a param array, and that we would prioritize param span over the array. So I wouldn't be particularly worried about locking ourselves out or anything.
I guess we need the array either way, but we could have maybe added the once params came up.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the only thing is immutable array already has an add method, which takes a single thing. And it might have add params. Let me check.
I don't see one. Emo, can you smack the zoom in button a couple times?
Smack, smack, smack.
Thank you.
Okay, it's just add of a single item.
All right, so the create is on the non-generic. Yeah.
Yeah, the create is fine because we already have those cases handled basically.
Okay.
Create already has an overload that takes a single t, and that handles the string case. And then it already has an overload that takes an array, and so that handles the array case. Technically, if if you have create of and you explicitly specify char, and then you pass a string, that could again be considered ambiguous between IEnumerable and read-only span, but I think that's even less likely than calling add range.
Okay. For extension methods, our user-defined conversions are not considered, right?
That is correct, yeah.
But if someone explicitly calls immutable array to immutable array and passes in an array, that will now fail due to being ambiguous. So using the static syntax will fail unless we also add the array overload to immutable array.
That is probably true. Wait, no, because because an array is a built-in conversion. That is probably true. So we should probably add an array version there as well.
Which doesn't need to be an extension method, but it could be. It's just there to save the static invocation syntax from non-extension languages. You haven't done any edits to this, right, Emo?
I have not made any edit. I mean, I'm still editing.
Okay.
Because reasons. I guess I really need to add checkboxes to APIstuff.net so I can copy multiple signatures. That would be actually quite helpful.
Let's see. Oh, interesting. It's not ambiguous. The extension method is not ambiguous.
As an extension.
Like array dot. I just made a test for a test example, and it binds to the enumerable, not the span.
Right. Because I feel like user-defined conversions aren't invoked for extension methods.
Yeah.
But if you call it with static syntax, then now it should fail.
Probably. That's also not failing. I don't know why this isn't failing. Doesn't make sense. I have to go. Regardless, the add range stuff, I think, is we have the rules that we need to make this work. So.
So. Oh no. Oh god damn it. I'm actually surprised that immutable array has more methods that do ranges than the underlying builder.
Yeah, it's odd.
I would have thought that the builder is the more flexible one. Who designed this type?
Yeah, like it doesn't have remove range or insert range. It doesn't even have, it barely has an insert.
Yeah, I think when we designed it, I think the idea was that normally the stuff is more sequential, right? Versus the immutable array one is the one that sticks around, and that's the one where you may want to do more crazy stuff with. But all right, so then I think I have them all now.
Huh.
Okay, so
I didn't realize that builders had an item ref method. That's cool.
okay, so I believe not quite.
Creating test cases is easy when you have SharpLab.
Yeah, that's what I'm doing.
And insert range from span and remove range from span are already on the builder.
Yeah, let me paste in what the actual thing is. So here's the situation with the existing signatures blended in for completeness. So basically what the proposal would be is that we would add a T overload for the ones where we add, sorry, a T array overload were the ones where we add a read-only span of T.
Yep.
And that would
Where it
apply
doesn't
to,
already have one.
yeah, so like in many cases, not in many, but on the builder it already has that. But on the immutable array one it did not. So basically that would apply to add range, insert range, and remove range. And the remove range, I think the proposal is to only have read-only span with an equality comparer. So that's the only place where I added the T array as well.
That could be a typo on my part.
I mean, it seems it seems like you probably want overloads that don't take an equality compare, would be my guess, right?
Yeah, I must have just typoed that.
Should we just default those?
Sure.
Good. And then the other thing that I added to this proposal from the last time was, so we mentioned that we wanted an as span that takes a start and a length. And so because one of the points of this proposal was to add C# 11 or C# 8 and 9 support, I also added an as span that took a range. So you can say x ... y, right?
The as span of range already exists?
No.
But we shouldn't need it then, should we? Because I thought range, oh sorry, square bracket will call the as span, but if you already have a range object, you need the range method.
Yeah, so that's what you're talking about is the implicit slicing support. So that will translate, and like you take an immutable array and you index it with a span, or with a range, I mean, and it will slice that, and so we'll
Okay.
call slice and get an immutable array back. But if we wanted to have an as span, because we already have an existing as span on a mutable array, but the proposal last time was that we have on the other types where we have as span, we have an int start and an int and length overload, and so my proposal is to also add a range overload for that one, so that you can use the same ... syntax.
Have we done that anywhere else?
I don't know.
Good question.
I feel like the answer is no.
I would guess not. I'm not seeing any such overloads on source.net.
For some reason, or adds.
Memory extensions for as span has an extension method that takes this array and a range, but most of the other as spans do not.
Yeah, probably we should have done the same thing for string. I don't know why we didn't do it for string.
There's a number of places where we did as span, like like value string builder, like. Actually, are any of these not value string builder? Or are they just value string builder allocated over multiple different namespaces? They're all value string builder over multiple namespaces.
Yeah, the only two that take a range are array segment of T and T bracket bracket.
And we didn't do it for string segment. We just have the one overload.
Yeah, I mean, given that immutable array is more like T bracket brackets, I would probably say, but if that has it, this should also have it. And then the other one, and if anybody asks for it, we can add it. But
fair enough. Okay, I think the add range that takes a T array, all the other things that take just a T array that are touching immutable array take it as params. So we should probably make it params here for symmetry.
All right.
And then
on
the non-generic immutable array to immutable array of T, we should add an overload that takes a T array. It doesn't need to be an extension method, but it needs to exist or it can't be called with static syntax.
So the add range you're proposing that takes T bracket should be
Params T bracket.
Are there any cases where this can create ambiguities now?
I don't.
None of the add ranges take a single member of the same type T.
Yeah, because it would, because unless you had a type that was implementing IEnumerable of itself.
Yeah, the only
but I'm not
case where
certain
that
of
would
what
be
the overload resolution rules are there, because I think there probably are overload resolution rules that say you should prefer the non-params over params, but I don't know that for certain.
I feel like that's true as well. But I've been wrong on resolution multiple times already, so I might not be trustworthy.
I don't think there's any single person in the world who is trustworthy on overload resolution, like without checking.
I would say Anders, but he's been out of the loop for a while, so.
I don't think even Eric Lippert would, there's probably some question you could ask Eric Lippert. It's like, oh, I need to go figure that out.
Well, not even the compiler does, right? The compiler is lazy and always looks at the spec, right?
Yep.
So a while back, we reviewed and approved issue 822, which ensured that the surface area of the builder and the root type are equivalent, which means that these APIs we're adding to a mutable array of T, like insert range and remove range, need to also be approved for builder.
Yeah, so the funny thing is
Okay.
that the builder doesn't have the equivalent of methods today.
They do because we approved it, it's just not been implemented. And so by extension, we should also be approving them here.
Okay.
And implementing them when 822 is implemented, which, ideally we just do it all at the same time, unless there's time constraints.
Yeah. Here, let me
But
paste.
we did review and approve that the builder and the immutable type itself should be in sync and stay in sync moving forward.
Yeah, I think that makes sense to me.
Fair enough.
I mean, to me, I would just add a comment here, like,
Yeah, I think a comment just saying like as per 822, we should make sure that the two surfaces stay in sync.
is it literally
and then
issue 822?
yeah, it's 822, and then
I
that
pasted
should
the
be,
link in the. Okay.
that should be sufficient for us to, add those corresponding types to the builder when this one's implemented, or vice versa, depending on
Yeah.
what happens first in time constraints, just to ensure we don't miss it and get them out of sync again.
All right. So then, any objections, or can we just go ahead with what we have now on the screen?
We need the extra overload of two immutable array on the, or sorry, of two immutable array and create. Sorry, we already have it for
we don't
create.
we don't need one for create. Create.
Yeah, we already have it for create, but for immutable array dot to immutable array of t, we need an array overload where it can't be called in static syntax. It does not need to be an extension method. It can be if we want it to.
Do we care about that? Because I mean, you can still call it with static syntax. You just have to cast, right? But who calls it with static syntax?
Do extension methods work in F#? Do extension methods work in COBOL.NET?
I mean, I think they work in F#, but I have no idea.
You probably have to pass them to the extension monad or something.
Fire.
Yeah, I mean, if somebody needs them, we can add them, but it seems again fringy.
That's fair. I mean, I guess we can leave them off because the answer is call create because they're the same thing.
Right.
Yeah.
Didn't create have this other issue with string?
No, create has a T overload that just takes a T. And so that's the most specific for string.
Yeah, it'll create an immutable array of string instead of an immutable array of char. But
technically, it did have it if you called immutable dot create with specifying char, and then you pass a string. But I think again that is unlikely.
So basically, if I have generic inference today and I upgrade, we would still call the same thing, right? You would still get back an immutable array of string.
Of string, yep.
A length 1.
Because
you're passing a single parameter of type T, and there is no more specific overload than the generic that is specialized to type T.
I see.
Public static immutable array of T, create of T, T item. That one.
So would we... So what happens when I call create with a span? Not a read-only span, an actual span. Do we then... We will just call the read-only span?
It will call the read-only span version, right? Because it's not convertible to any of the others.
Well, why would it not give me back an immutable array of span of T?
Because read-only span or span of T can't be used as a generic argument.
Well, but that's after, right? So I assume it would bind to that and would say, sorry, you can't do that. It would just fail to compile.
I have no idea.
Looking.
Like I'm almost confident that it won't compile. In which case, you should probably add an overload that takes just a span.
T. Static. Yeah, Emo's right. It will bind to create of creative T.
So we need a span version as well.
Yep.
It's the eternal struggle with these conversions.
Yeah, because it finds the most specific overload, and then it says, "Yep, can't call that."
Yeah, that's what I was expecting. All right, so that means we have, but it's still somewhat reasonable. I mean, it's not. It kind of sucks for these core types a little bit, but I think that's fine. Oh god, the new way GitHub renders issues is a bit annoying. It's cool, but sometimes it's a bit annoying. All right, so then, so we have a create T that takes items. Sorry, no, we don't. Oh, actually, hold on. That's
Wow,
one.
I hadn't even seen
We
that.
do.
Yet.
We do have a create that takes an array of items.
Yeah, we don't need that one. That's the one we already have.
Yep.
Okay, but the extension method, it's
Yeah, so
not a
this,
problem for span, right?
no, it still is. So we should still decide whether we want to be able to call it on, because I think we need to, right? It would be weird if you can't.
Yeah, because there's no user-defined conversion. So if you said span dot x, it shouldn't work.
No, you would have to explicitly cast it, but that seems ugly. It's funny how when you look at the method groups, it seems like we completely randomly selected the set of types, and in practice it's actually not that. It's more like what actually is compatible at compile time. It's kind of a constrained solution.
All right, from all the things we've discussed, I think that's it. If we decide, or as long as we're comfortable with not being able to call immutable array dot to immutable array with static syntax with an array. But since that's the same as create, just call create.
Yeah, I mean, I'm comfortable with that for two reasons. One, it only hits you when your language supports span, which is like 2. And both of them seem to handle extension methods. So I'll be okay with that.
That's
And
fair.
we have a
If
method
you went into, a project style and said convert all extension methods into static call, then that'll
Right. Yeah.
fail to bind for some reason. Like that would be confusing, but no one's going to do that, so it's fine.
Yeah, that would be my argument. And we don't give people the means to have no taste, right?
I mean,
imagine
we added more.
Imagine your average link query syntax when you call everything as static invocations. That would be not helpful to readability. All right, so then let me just hit post before this thing is lost.
It would make you rethink what you were doing.
Yeah, that's not how that works. In my experience, there's no amount of code where a customer would be like, huh.
All right. Does this warrant a breaking change doc since we know of a case where it will be a source breaking change?
Do we do this usually?
We don't generally introduce source breaking changes.
Are we literally marking every small thing? I thought we don't do that, but we can probably do that. Let me actually edit this here to make clear where the breaking change is. All right, everybody happy with that?
Yep.
Nice.
Ship it.
No, we only have to implement it.
No, that's not our job.
Well, I meant the royal we.
But Steve's
All right,
on the
folks.
call. It hasn't said anything, so he's probably already finished the implementation.
No, I only do that for the ones I truly care about.
Oh, burn.
I see how it is.
That's a sick
All right.
one.
I don't think we had anything else I had input to. So see y'all later.
See you. Good luck with your car.
Thanks.
All right, so then I think the next one on the list was the JSON string enum converter.
Yeah, I can go with that. So basically, this comes after a couple of requests from people who would like to see this converter be unsealed. And the reason for that is they want to use the JSON converter attribute in conjunction with this converter with custom constructor arguments. So this is a really simple proposal to unseal this class while sealing all the virtual methods that the converter exposes.
So why would we do that?
I should have prepared an example, but it's definitely quoted in this issue and in a few other ones. But the idea is that you want to be able to pass a version of this JSON string enum converter into a JSON converter attribute, which is applied to class definitions, or sorry, member definitions, with custom parameters in the JSON naming policy or in the allow integer values parameter. So basically extending, modifying the default parameters that are being passed into the converter. Does that make sense?
No,
If
I meant
not, I'll find an example.
And for that, Eric, I mean, what you might do in other situations is have that attribute accept the arguments to pass in on your behalf. The reason we can't do that here is because JSON naming policy is an arbitrary class. Is that right?
Actually, that's an enum.
Oh, okay. Why can't we do that here? Like make it more general and just have the attribute allow it to accept arguments?
So there's actually been a request for that, but my feeling was that it would be simpler if we unseal this particular converter, because all other public converters that we expose are in fact unsealed, and it seems like a pretty standard way to do this is by extending this class. Adding constructor arguments to the JSON converter attribute is a way to address this, but my feeling was that this is both type unsafe and also restricts you to constructors that whose parameters support literal values.
The only thing to mention as well is JSON constructor attributes is unsealed and has a virtual create converter method, which allows creating instances of constructors using parameterized constructors. So that workaround, and there's a tracking issue for having the attributes allow constructor parameters, but we already have a workaround for that as well, which would apply here. Just wanted to mention that.
Yeah, if you scroll down to the bottom of the issue, Liam has actually shared a link to that. So it's in the tests link. Yeah, that works as well.
so. What I don't understand is why would we seal those methods?
So the idea here is that we want to unseal the converter to allow extending it by setting defaults to one of the constructors. But we didn't want to go through the hassle of verifying that the class works as expected when people start overriding some of the virtual methods, and in fact that brings a whole new class of corner cases that we need to be addressing. So the simple approach would be to just seal the virtuals and only allow extensibility by inheriting the class and passing parameters to the constructors in the base class.
I mean, sure, but it feels a little bit, I don't know. At this point, we're
So-
going out of our way to make the type less useful than it could have been. I mean, I understand that people can do crazy stuff with that, but
I mean, if we don't, it's already like the converter factory that it creates is internal. So unless we also make that public, it's not clear what someone's going to do in their override of create factory or whatever that method is called.
I mean, they could be returning their own thing. I struggle to identify a real use case for that, but
Right. But at that point, why wouldn't they just create their own converter?
yeah, exactly.
I agree. Yeah. So sealing these methods seems like the simple approach here.
Sure.
Yeah, I know we don't do it often, but I actually think that's what the guidelines suggest.
And in fact, you know, we would need to add some testing to check what the behavior is if somebody inherits the converter and overrides can convert to always return true. What happens when you try to call the factory method with, you know, a type parameter that is, you know, not an enum? We should be adding checks and throwing exceptions, which I believe we're not doing at the moment.
So I feel like you said the other converters or whatever are already unsealed, but looking at source.net, they look like they're all sealed.
I believe so, yeah. Because that's how we started them.
Yeah, this will probably be the first like value handling converter that would be unsealed.
Because I think I'm sort of with Steve of if the only scenario, if we started with something sealed because we had a reason to, I'm not going to ask what the reason was because I think I know what it is and I'm looking at the guidelines. If we started with the class being sealed and the only reason we're unsealing it is because somebody wants to do something with an attribute, then it sounds like we should just empower the scenario at the attribute instead of at the by unsealing the type.
I mean,
If we have a reason to unseal the type, then sure, but it sounds like we have more of a reason to go modify an attribute.
it's also the only converter that is public today, correct? Because the idea is that people need to instantiate it to tweak it, right?
Yeah, so I mean, my earlier assertion about this being the only unsealed converter might be either that, or I think it might be the only public converter that has a constructor that accepts arguments. And as such, you might want to inherit the converter factory to be able to use the attribute. You know, I think extending the JSON converter attribute to also accept constructor arguments is a valid workaround. But like I said, that has an element of being type safe, I guess. And not supporting parameter types that do not support literal values. And you know, for what it's worth, the only real workaround we have for this scenario at the moment is either what Lyomi proposed, so basically inheriting the JSON converter attribute itself and overriding some methods. That involves doing a bit of reflection logic, or the other alternative is to wrap the enum converter with a custom converter factory of your own making that hardwires the defaults. So I think just unsealing the type is, you know, a simple pragmatic change that unblocks users. I'm failing to detect any drawbacks to making this. Performance isn't a concern because it's just a converter factory. It produces the converters that will be used in serialization anyway.
I mean, with the first approach, there needn't be any reflection if you have like a static reference to the constructor you are trying to reference?
Yeah, I guess when I said reflection, I was mentioning the fact that you need to actually override a method that accepts a type argument and do some logic with that. From my perspective, that seems like a bit of overkill for something that seems like a very common scenario.
Yeah, so I guess my question is are we happy with the general usability of JSON string enum converter by itself, or should we just allow customizations by just using an attribute? Because it's the only converter that effectively we expect people to manually instantiate and add to the context, versus the other ones are basically either built in or a side effect of you applying attributes, right? So I mean, we can totally unseal the type, but should we just make it easier for people to actually have the right behavior they want for their string enums? I guess is my question. And that one I don't have a good sense for, but like it seems still like if everybody just derives the type to just hardcode some parameters that are common, then my first question is, should those be maybe built-in types? Or should we just have, I don't know, a more convenient way to construct it? Or are we just basically making something that requires 10 lines of code, now 4 lines of code, but we really want is the 1 line of code?
I mean, it's a good point, and that would be solved by extending the JSON converter attribute itself to accept constructor parameters. That would definitely solve the issue. But the two approaches are not mutually exclusive. You could solve it one way, and you
totally
should also be able to solve it the other way.
Yeah, I mean, given that this is the only public type, the only public converter, I don't care that the other ones are sealed. Because, I mean,
exactly.
This one is still self-consistent in the sense that, yeah, we have one and that one is unsealed.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, I thought there was a reference to others being unsealed, and I assumed public, and I was looking to see what approach we had done on those, and there weren't any.
Yeah, and for what it's worth, I find it unlikely that we'll be able to implement the other proposal extending the attribute on time for 6. This is effectively very small PR, so
yep.
We'll certainly be.
But isn't Laomi's comment that we actually don't need to do anything? This is already user solvable?
It certainly is, and there exist other workarounds like wrapping the converter. They just feel like overkill.
Fair enough.
I mean, it's not terrible, but it does feel very much boilerplate-y, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, I don't have any concerns with that. It just seems to me like we are just only halfway there, but I mean, if the only thing we can get, I mean, if the difference is let's do nothing or let's get halfway there, I think I'm with let's go halfway there.
And these are the only overrides that matter?
So the only two virtuals that exist, I think.
Well, I mean, equals and
Sure.
toString and get hashcode are all.
Once you compare converters, you're on your own.
Yes, I don't think we actually use any of those, so they probably don't matter.
Fair enough. All right, so then I guess I just move to my assessment line. Here we go. Happy with that?
Cool, thanks.
All right, then let's do this. Great. Boom. There we go. All right, so one down.
No, similar story as the previous one. This is a very minimalistic change. Effectively, I want to extend the JSON converter attribute so that it can be applied to interfaces. Currently, it's constrained to classes and structs. People have been working around this issue by inheriting the JSON converter attribute and changing the attribute usage for the attribute. Extending it for interfaces seems like a natural thing to do. We already support converters for interface types, including internally, so that's it really. The actual API proposal is linked at the end of the original post, by the way, Emo.
This one here, right?
That one, yeah.
So this is if you manually register a converter for an interface, it works, but you can't do it from the attribute.
Right.
Seems fine. I feel like the reason we didn't have it on interface is it's like, well, it doesn't make any sense to say that you know how to instantiate the interface. But if the converter API already works, then people are using it, then sure.
Yep. For what it's worth, it was discussed in the issue that extending this might have ramifications from the perspective of polymorphism, but that's simply not the case. It's just, applying a custom converter to an interface, and polymorphism is a completely orthogonal concern.
Because this is only exact type, right? There's no inheritance checking.
I mean, it's up to the custom converter to do whatever it likes, whether it wants to do polymorphism or something else. It's up to the author.
Fair enough. But the serializer says, I see this type. Can anyone handle this type? And there's no like, I see this type. Somebody's like, I can handle object. And it's like, cool, I'll call you. They have to just, they're presented with the type and they respond affirmative. So, yeah, seems fine.
All right.
That's called stalling while Emo types.
Nice.
I feel like the last one I didn't approve. I only removed the label, I think. Oh, I did. Oh, weird. What was the last issue? Does anybody remember?
Unsealing JSON Enum converter.
That's the one, right? Yes, that is correct.
That's a related issue. The one that we actually reviewed
Here we
is that one.
And so this one is, yes, I only removed the attribute. See, I'm good like that.
Nice.
All right, so now this one we just approved, right? All right, hot reload. I assume that's Steven.
Tom's here to talk about
it. Sure. So we're asking to add a new attribute to the BCL called reloadable attribute that is going to be used for a new Roslyn feature for reloading types that normally would not succeed through the normal edit and continue pipeline due to limitations in the framework or the runtime or the compiler itself. Sort of like a high-level workaround for some complicated runtime issues in edit and continue. And then the idea is that when the attribute is on a type, it would emit a pound 1 or a pound 2, a pound 3, like iterative changes when an edit is done, and then the framework will be able to load the new type. And so from a customer standpoint, they can make whatever edits they want in their web pages or whatever, the CSHTML, and it will emit the new type. They won't run into a bunch of like potholes in edit and continue, and kind of give them a smooth dev inner loop making these edits. And this has kind of come up because the Hot Reload working group has been working through a bunch of end-to-end scenarios. And when testing things like CS/HTML, things fall apart pretty quickly. And so this idea of adding the reloadable attribute has been shown through prototyping that we can successfully work around these edited issues and provide like a very positive workflow for dev inner loop. And so that the idea is that we want to add the attribute to the BCL, and it just instructs the compiler to emit a new type with the pound 1, pound 2, pound 3 on successive edits. And this is kind of in line with the rest of the work that we're doing for hot reload, where we have other attributes for annotating types for notifications for cache reloading or UI reloading. But this is more on the compiler side rather than on the runtime side.
So basically it marks types where the idea is that, you know, the framework is basically able to instantiate different types, and it's largely transparent, like a form or something else, right? But it doesn't really matter what the type actually is.
Yeah, like a CS/HTML page is a perfect example.
Yeah.
It'll just emit like a new type. The compiler does this.
And the idea is that there's no language syntax, right? The user is supposed to literally use the attribute syntax to apply this, right? So we would expect the user to actually have to reference that attribute by hand, right?
So the hope is that we can put this in the framework itself. So for example, in CS/HTML, this is like code generated by the framework itself. It will just emit the attribute.
Gotcha.
And so it should be 99% seamless for customers, but we want to add the attribute so that third-party frameworks can use it, or if users have like a special need in their own code to add to do this, they can do so.
I see. So yeah, if the idea is that, you know, normal human beings, you know, excluding framework or compiler authors for a second, they would never have to use the bracket syntax. They would just use the framework, and then the generated code, like the, you know, .cs that's generated by the compiler or the framework, might actually reference the attribute, but the user generally doesn't. If that's the case, I think the namespace proposal makes sense to me, but normally we don't use compiler services for stuff that users are expected to use, in which case I would probably put it in system diagnostics code analysis, because that's where the other, you know, linker style attributes are in, for example. But if the idea is that most of the time users never have to interface with that thing, it's generally used by tooling, I think it's fine to put it in compiler.
I think it's an overreaching term, and especially if users aren't expected to type it, we should add like 4 more particles to it to make it be extremely scenario specific, and it doesn't matter because users aren't going to type it. But reloadable seems like a thing that somebody may have in their own API system, meaning something completely different. So we should avoid single words.
I see. That's fair, probably. Unfortunately, we don't have like a lot of naming in this space, right?
Well, we just did all that patch. I mean, because what's weird about this is reloadable types is actually not reloadable types, right? It's you painted on non-reloadable types to say don't reload them, just generate them side by side, and we'll deal with it.
Yeah, that's a good point. Like, it's actually the opposite of what this does. Yeah.
This is really side by side edit and continue.
That's a great name, by the way.
I mean, it explicitly describes what it does, and the assertion is, you know, maybe 3 frameworks / generators are going to have to deal with it, but 99% of users don't need to. Like, we don't need a pretty name here. Pretty names are actually a problem here because we're stealing a name from the future.
So maybe targeted patching opt-in attribute then, maybe. No, I mean, it's I think the only other API service that we recently talked about was metadata updater, right? Where we have is supported in apply update now. That's the only thing that's kind of in the same vicinity. And that one lives in system reflection metadata. Yeah, reloadable.
That's right.
But I mean, I don't know, like metadata side by side, I don't know, seems like a
patch side by side.
Like, I think last time we talked about it, nobody wanted to use edit and continue or hot reload in the naming, right? Stephen, I think that was your point.
Yeah, I'd like to avoid that.
So what do you
I mean,
think?
really, this is an indication to the compiler to generate a new version of something. So, you know, any of those words, I don't know, generate blah or regenerate or replace with new, I don't know, something along those lines. But it doesn't have to be specific to edit and continue or hot reload. It's just there is a type here, and the compiler is going to create a new one for its whatever purposes.
Yeah. Patch side by side.
I don't know what it means to patch side by side. Those are contradictory terms.
Well, you have to patch the assembly, but you're doing the type side by side with the in the patch. So.
Yeah, it's like jumbo shrimp.
I love jumbo shrimp.
I think, I'm hungry too. Yeah, my favorite phrase is the central cornerstone. That's another one of those. I mean, actually, I mean, I wouldn't mind the term metadata somewhere because that seems the term we use elsewhere.
I mean, open square bracket, edit creates a new type, close square bracket. Like,
yeah, I mean, so while the name is not super important in terms of, because users don't have to apply it, they will typically see it when they decompile, right? And people do decompile their own code quite a bit. So we should at least make sure that when they look at it, that it, at least when you read it, you kind of get an idea what it does.
Is can the namespace make that clear? Where it says system runtime compiler services, it's super clear that it's being consumed by the compiler.
I mean, I think the namespace is fine, given the way you described it's being used. I think, I mean, if people commonly have to add a using to it, then I would not put it in compiler services because the namespace is pretty large and the vast majority of stuff in the namespace is like for either super fringe scenarios or like, effectively for the compiler, right? So like we generally don't put stuff in there that we expect people to actually manually reference. But if it's almost always done by some sort of code generation framework, like I don't know, WinForms or ASP.NET or something, it's totally fine. And I think, yeah, if in any decent decompiler, when you, basically open it up in the view, like when you hover over it, it shows you what namespace it's from. So like if people see system runtime compiler service, they assume plumbing, which is probably the right conclusion here anyway. And then it just becomes like, okay, what does this attribute actually mean? And I think, I'm pretty sure that once we have hot reload, there will be advanced articles that Steve and others are putting together, like, oh, here's actually how this stuff works. And then those people care, right?
I mean, one problem is we decided that the unsafe class, which to Levi's chagrin and less or so to mine, is getting, used non-zero. That's in compiler services. So there are already people who have usings for it. Granted, the kind of people who have usings for it and the kind of people who would make a feature that adds an attribute called reloadable that they're scanning on their own types is probably low, but that's combined with the IntelliSense search across all namespaces. Like, I think that we don't want a good word here. We can have an okay phrase, but we don't want a good word.
Well, I think we're open to ideas on the name.
Edit metadata by creating new type attribute. I mean,
ship it.
Yeah, I mean that goes back to my point of it can be descriptive and we don't care how short it is because no one's typing it. It's going to cost the assembly it's defined in has to pay for the length of the string. Otherwise, it's just referenced as import declaration 7. So, it doesn't matter.
I know. I'd be inclined to say, we're fine adding the attribute, and maybe Tom and Tomas can go off and come up with 3 proposals for if this name isn't desirable. 2 others, and then we just pick one over email.
Sounds reasonable to me.
Yeah, but avoid single words and words that you think that somebody may want to create their own attribute of a similar name but a very different purpose. Squeaky Lobster's already taken. It's my
Do you
favorite.
have an attribute called Squeaky Lobster?
No, it's a reg key for ESE database chunk sizes, I think.
We totally have to add that to the framework.
It's the thing I commonly reference for functionality that never got UI to expose it, that has a reg key that no one ever thought was going to get used, but now it's a documented reg key because CSS or whatever they were called at the time had to tell a customer change the setting and it'll fix your problem.
I'll be disappointed if the next API we review isn't a blocking issue about adding system runtime compiler services Squeaky Lobster.
I mean, Grunk tried really hard to get printer on fire exception through, so I'm sure he would come up with a good reason for Squeaky Lobster.
I mean, now I want out of Squeaky Lobster exception. All right. So then, how about should we mark this as needs work then, or approved unless you don't like the name? Like, does anybody hate the name that I just typed in, or?
I mean, it sounds like it's approved, and if they dislike the name and want to come back with it, then we can have that discussion.
Yeah,
but
that's kind of where I was heading. Unless
if they accept the name, there's no further action.
Yeah.
So.
That's what I was asking, whether anybody already hates the name, or can we just assume that that's the name? But all right, so then, all right, happy?
All right. Yes, thank you.
Absolutely.
Sorry, I ruined your name for you.
Yeah, sometimes you make things better, sometimes by making other things worse, right? That's how that goes. All right.
Okay. So this issue talks about supporting property ordering when serializing JSON data. Today, the serializer uses reflection order when retrieving the list of properties and fields on an object in order to write it. And we write that data in the order retrieved from our reflection call. So we go from the declared type itself and then walk up the base classes up until the top. So from most derived to base. For various reasons, customers need their JSON to be written in a specific order, whether the consumer of that JSON requires specific ordering like ID first, or for whatever scenarios. So in the lots of scenarios where you might want your JSON to be in like a deterministic order every time you serialize. So we have here a simple proposal to have a new JSON property attribute with a property, with a constructor that takes an order number and expose that by a property as well. And this order determines the order and serialization. If there are ties, then we use the reflection order where we would see stuff on the derived class first. Ties just mean duplicates. Say two properties have the same order. Say you might have that if you derive from some base class and then you inadvertently use the same order as like some other property on the base class. That's the kind of situation where that scenario might arise. And if you don't specify an order, we choose a sentinel value of 0. So that could mean that they'll be written first, depending on the set of order like numbers you specify. We don't propose to have any validation on what numbers you provide, and just sort them according to based on the order. So no validation. You can specify int max or that. We won't publicly document that or encourage users to do it. We just don't really see any value in doing all sorts of validation on So that's pretty much the other I mean, proposal in a nutshell. Some example here of how it to be used. And there's precedent you need to solve the JSON and other serializers for this same feature, and it proves to be pretty usable.
I mean, one question I have is like, if I assume people care more about what comes first rather than what comes later, right? So I would assume that, city, for example, you kind of don't want in between ID and first name, right? You kind of, because you basically said for city, I don't care. So you didn't put an attribute on it at all. So it seems almost like the sentinel value should be int max value. And then among those that you also don't care, you just set, alphabetically sort them. That seems a bit more consistent with what people probably want. Like, as in, I want to control the sort order of the first 6-7 properties, let's say, and then the rest is just whatever, right?
Should go to the end, I see.
Yeah,
So
I had the same thought and was willing to accept that negative numbers solve that problem for people, but I'll say me too.
So okay, so the proposed behavior here is if you don't have something specified, you go to the end. Is that?
Yeah, and basically you say everything. Basically, today's world, everything is in max value. So the only sort you get is metadata name, and then you would keep that behavior. And now you're basically saying, well, you can also specify a value lower than in max value, in which case, among those, you control the sort order. But that seems more like what people probably want. Like I would guess if you have something like an Azure, SDK kind of thing where you have like 5,000 properties, you're like, okay, the 20 things people care about is you put them first. And then you sort order them, and then the rest you just don't care. Alphabetically sorting is okay.
Yeah, I mean, another option, because I can think of a few cases where you're like, look, I don't care, but I want the array to be last so that all the simple properties got read first. You don't have a way to force something to be last. Is that maybe JSON property order can also be applied to a type, and that says what the unspecified value is.
I see. So you put it on the type, and everywhere we see that type in the object graph, we would assume that number. Is that?
Well, so if you put it here on person, if you put JSON property number 105 on person, then city, because it didn't have a different order, it treats its unspecified order as 105.
Yeah, I think that has the ambiguity though that what Leomi was saying. Like, basically, your interpretation of the attribute at the type level is the default value for the members, versus what Leomi was saying is, the consuming property would get the sort order from the type.
Fair enough.
Yeah, it sounds like behavior that could be useful in different scenarios. But I guess naming would be like the name of the attribute would help us.
I mean, in practice, I think it's, if you want the property to be last, I think it's also fine to say you just manually put a high number on it, right?
Yeah, I mean, alternatively, the default could be 4 billion instead of the 4.2 billion that isn't that max value, and it would be like, look, right, we picked a number bigger than the number of properties you should have. If you want to be after all the unspecified things, start at 4 billion.
That's fair. I mean,
so int.max value means I'm last, unless I tied with someone. Unspecified is I'm probably last. And specified is you get to use numbers that make sense to humans and programmers.
Yeah, that's why I don't like negative numbers, because now you have to invert the order in your head, which is inconvenient. So what does JSON.NET have the feature, or is that something new?
It does have this feature. Honestly, I haven't verified that whether we are equivalent in terms of the strategies we're discussing here. Something I'd want to verify afterward. But so far, the discussions are making sense to me. But they have this feature in the same order property, the same JSON property attributes. Just how they resolve. I mean, ties are also treated the same. But some of the stuff we're discussing, I'm not sure whether they have the same behavior there as well. Does that answer the question?
I think so. I mean, to me, the question becomes really like, what is reasonable, right? And I kind of like the idea that we have a very high number in between, so you can do both without major surgery. Like Frederick in chat was suggesting that default value is U short max value. because 65,000 members is enough for everyone. But that seems not unreasonable because, I mean, it's at least a number that you can reference, right? I don't like 4 billion as a number because it seems
Fair enough.
extremely arbitrary, but like
Yeah, U-short max value seems fine.
We should validate that ushort.max value is not significantly under the actual IL limitations, because there will be enterprises that decide to do the extreme. I think 65K might actually be the IL limitation, but we should double check on that.
I mean, even if it's not, I would be inclined to say it's the default. Like if you're that enterprisey that you have that many fields, you get to apply the attribute on all of them.
I concur.
Yeah, that number sounds familiar with like constructor parameters, which are like 65,000, something like that. And then we chose a max of 64 for setup params.
I actually think it's the maximum number of locals as well. I'm not sure for members. I could believe that you can have more than 65,000 members.
Maybe. Like, there are a lot of tokens in IL, and the tokens are all ints, and they all have pieces. So I could believe that 16 bits is the type local member.
Well, and in particular, there's the scenario of you're doing something like fixed size buffers, where if you're doing it for a non-primitive type, you have to individually declare each element. Doing 65,000 elements for a class isn't necessarily unreasonable if you wanted to have that kind of fixed size buffer.
I actually like that this is on video because I kind of want to clip this part. Somebody just said 65,000 members is not completely unreasonable. I think that's that's something that should be on record. No, I mean, yes, I mean, like we see things like this. I mean, just yesterday I saw somebody posting an enterprise example of an IOC usage where the constructor took like 60 interfaces or something, and then you have to declare 60 fields and then 60 assignments. And people said that, C# needs to have a shorter syntax for that. And most people said like, well, maybe you should not take that many interfaces in the first place. But yeah, I mean, the problem in practice is that nobody writes code like this, right? Once you go above, 100 or 1,000, like it's generated code, right? And when you talk about generated code, then yeah, like the sky really is the limit, right? And whether you do 10,000 or 100,000 is no longer really a problem, right? It's a factor somewhere in your processing. And I remember having had a conversation with, I think it was Cobol or Fortran or one of those companies, and they basically said like, well, they transpile existing code, and the way the code is structured just results in, thousands and thousands of locals, and they were running into JIT limitations for that reason. And they have no easy way to rewrite the existing code in their transpiling. So yeah, I could imagine that being a case, but I mean, I'm okay with saying, these are still defaults, right? And once you generate the code, you might as well apply the attribute, right? So I think it's fine to say you just use ushort max value regardless of the limit.
Right, but you could. But if 65K is actually, someone in chat just said 65,534 is the actual limit. But I was going to say if the limit isn't actually 65K, then uint.max value or int.max value is equally as rememberable. You don't actually have to remember what 2 to the power of 32 minus 1 is.
Right, but we wanted a number that was less than int.max value so you could force yourself to be past it.
Yeah. I mean, you could say it's int max value divided by 2, right? But
sure.
But that seems also...
I guess, yes, 4 billion was uint.max value, so the 2.4 billion divided by 2, so you get the 1.2 billion. People who type that out as a decimal number are going to think it looks arbitrary, but it makes sense in binary.
Yeah, so if you only have 2 fingers, it's fine.
Yeah, so anyway, my suggestion is use a big number. Ushort.max value, 2 to the 30, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And then I recommend that we have an analyzer that points out that you have 2 fields that have the same value.
Yeah, except when they don't have any, right? I think so. If you have, let's say, city and address, and neither of them have an attribute on it, that probably shouldn't warn, right? Because that's the intent. You would only put the attribute on things you care about, and then for the
Right,
things you
yeah,
put
so-
the attribute, you should not have duplicates. Yeah.
Right. If first name and last name on this type both said JSON property order 2, then it should squiggle that and say, you seem to be wanting to control your order, but you've left it ambiguous. And then it should also check the type hierarchy as much as it can to say, hey, your base class, you started at 6, your base class now has gone up to 8. You're mixing with your base class. Maybe you didn't mean to. So certainly not an error, because the runtime's going to handle it. Maybe a warning, maybe just info. But I think that it would be valuable to provide such an analyzer.
Yeah. Makes sense. So we have a maximum value, and that's the default for anything that's not specified. And then that falls back to the reflection order, right? When we first, like, the properties itself first when I would write it that order. Is that the summary here? Do I have that correct?
So I didn't catch the last part. What
So
was it?
saying we have a maximum value, which is the default for anything that is not specified, and
Yep.
that is, yeah, okay.
So you have a default value, which is a big number, but don't use int.max value so that people can still pick bigger numbers.
Right.
Gotcha. And that number here is int max divided by 2.
Yeah, I mean some
That was the
numbers, I
solution.
mean, yeah.
Okay. Were there any other questions?
I think that makes sense. I mean, the only thing that kind of is always problematic is I assume the sort order is across the hierarchy, right?
Across the hierarchy, you mean across like the object graph, like base and direct?
Well, imagine you have an you have a base class, person, and then a derived class employee. It seems desirable that if I have that I can create a total order across my fields. So you don't basically just sort by which type introduced them and then by order, but you basically allow me to say, yeah, I know that the base type has, the sort range is 10, 20, 30, 40, and on the derived type I can insert something in between. Right? Otherwise you have this problem where, well, you have this polymorphic hierarchy, but then for, certain reasons you just want a derived type to insert something in the middle of what a base class has, and you wouldn't be able to do that. So basically what I'm trying to say is don't be smart. Just
Right. Well,
basically-
he had described the most common case that he expected for two things having the same value and creating a tie was that one came from the base class. So I think that they are all sorting together and not sorting by type.
Yeah, that's basically.
And if you are designing a base class to be inserted, a la, basic, then you'll follow basics rules and increment by 10.
Yes. I mean, that's, I think, what you would probably do in practice if you actually have polymorphic hierarchies, yeah.
And then just like basic, if you want 4 things to go between here and you've run out of numbers, you just create a new object and shove it in the middle. So.
Yeah. I mean, I would assume that most of it is either for compatibility with tools that have ordering constraints or for aesthetics, right?
Yeah, those are the two scenarios I've seen people asking for. Just like more readable, see the most important information first, or the other scenario.
Right.
Because if you only have one array and it could be long, having it last means that you can read all the static properties and then use the async enumerable loading thing that we added. But if it comes in the middle, then it's like, well, that's annoying.
Mm, Okay.
Anything else that I missed?
I think we just create an issue to track the analyzer one. Are there some labels for that one?
Yeah, we have a label for that, right? I think it's, what is it, analyzer?
hmm Yeah, I don't think it would have a fixer because
Yeah.
Right.
which of the two do you think is wrong, and did you want to bump it up or down? Or go to the next available number, or, yeah. He's just pointing out, hey, you probably typed something wrong.
Yep. All right, then I think
Thank-
that's it.
Thank you.
And we're actually done through the red, so any preferences for order?
That's the,
Otherwise, I would pick the 601s
Yeah, I mean,
and see how far
that's
we
our
get.
standard thing. Oh, in the case you had the thought, Emo, of why is the chat or the chat window from Restream, why did the font reset? Apparently that's a Restream setting and not an OBS setting, so when you changed it, it changed mine. So I shrunk it back, and now it shrunk back for you.
Interesting. I think I didn't explicitly do that, actually.
You'd made it bigger last time you streamed, and then when I streamed, it was bigger than the window that I had for it. So
I see. All right, so do we have context on this one? I assume we just messed up a type.
Steve, Tobe?
I have no idea. Is this an existing type that we already shipped?
I'm
We're
pretty
just
sure it is. It's one of those built-in com types, right?
so we messed up in the type, and no one uses these directly, so it doesn't matter. Is that the?
Apparently, we shipped it in .NET Framework 2.0.
Like 2005?
Yeah. So
It took 16 years to notice it was wrong?
well, we
It's-
shipped a lot of those types, so
To be fair, this isn't wrong. And if we're saying that this is wrong, then there's other issues with this type definition. This will marshal correctly. It's just that it's just that on one side it's a short, which is less convenient for some interop code when the corresponding managed type is unsigned. But this is by far not the only place where we're not exactly matching the signature.
I mean, my concern is I understand it's more convenient if it matches the native implementation for more code, but it would be a breaking change, right?
Right, and that's why I was saying, like, this is by far not the only place where we aren't consistent 100% with the exact type. Like, every place we're using int pointer, most of those are either actual pointers or they should be inuint, not int pointer.
Yeah. I mean,
I think we should close it.
Yeah, I think it's not enough value source breaking change.
Like, ushort's not even the right thing here anyways. It's a clip format enum. The int that comes as the third parameter should be uint. The fourth parameter is actually an int, and then the fifth one should be a uint as well if we were to be fixing this.
If nothing's actually broken, it's been around for 15 years. Like, just let sleeping dogs lie.
Yep. Yeah, like if we had just introduced it in this version, totally fix it, but the break isn't worth the benefit.
I mean, theoretically, what we could do is we could expose a property that's a use short. That makes it more convenient to do the cast, but I also think it's not hard to do the cast here for the very few people that are doing this.
I mean, my concern is less VB.NET because I don't think these types will be used by those languages. It's more hard to reason about code that is in existence for 15 plus years, right? And now you change the type, and you have all these subtle over resolution issues. And I mean, would I introduce the property? No, because realistically, you can just cast, and it's about the same lines of code / characters you have to enter. So I would probably just leave it as that and call it good. I mean,
like if we added the enum that it's actually being represented by, then a property for that, which is just the reinterpret cast, would be a lot more reasonable. But just assign this cast, nah.
So the really funny thing here is that clip format is actually the only one that's actually in enum. DW aspect and TimeEd, they are pseudo enums in that in native they're represented as D words. And you're just supposed to know which macros you're supposed to pass in, but we've typed them as enums in the managed signature.
Yeah, I think in the beginning, in the early days, we tried to be creative with the .NET representation and the native one. Today we probably wouldn't do that either. Yeah.
I mean, if it's a D word that has, 6 named constants, we would probably type it as an enum.
Yeah, but we probably wouldn't marshal it blindly, right? We would run it through a switch, probably.
Fair enough.
Anyway, so, all right, so then let's move on from this one. Okay, this one needs probably proper API review. Would be my guess. Didn't we already review this? No, this is all brand new. Okay. Yeah, this one we need other people for. Is Eric still on the call?
He's listed as on hold.
On hold. Okay, then I can talk to this one here. So this was a small request, which I think I already saw yesterday the comment that we may not want to do that at all. But basically the idea is we have this conversion to dynamic that people seem to like, or the proposed one, I should say. Where basically you can just dot into the JSON object rather than having to, use index or syntax for that. And so, assuming we have that feature, then it would be nice on the binary data type that is kind of this, overarching thing that the Azure SDK is using left and right to effectively convert from a byte array to the, strings and arrays and, deserialized objects to basically be able to do that directly in one line rather than having to go through some, more hoops to do that. So I think that API makes sense, but I think to me the concerning aspect here is that Steve said we are about removing support for dynamic. So if we do that, then we shouldn't approve this API, obviously. So it seems to me, at the very minimum, if that's what we do, we should just mark this issue as future and leave it open. Or if we believe we will never add dynamic back, we should just outright close it. Any other opinions?
Yeah, I mean, moving to future makes sense to me because it seems like with dynamic, we're saying we're not going to do it now because of the current implementation, but maybe it will get better in the future. Then we can circle back here.
But you probably want to remove ready for review. Otherwise, if we get fully caught up, yeah, I know, you can laugh. It'll just keep bouncing back up to the top of the list.
Yeah, I guess that's fair.
So back to suggestion.
I guess that's probably the best one, yeah.
Just so when somebody's scanning the backlog, they see, oh yeah, there's this thing here.
can't type for the life of me. All right, so that was easy. I think Eric is still on hold. Unless somebody else can talk to that.
Stefan?
Sorry, I was a little bit distracted. I probably could talk to this, but I heard my name.
I think this was basically just we had decided when this attribute originally came in, it had a bunch of constructors, and there was a decision made in the API review to remove the constructors and just have get settable properties, and in the attribute you use name equals value syntax for setting things. Right. And Eric is asking to add back constructors.
Yeah, I like the constructors personally. I think I liked them the first time. Yeah, but that's a matter of preference, I guess, how much you like the property initialization text.
Well, I feel like with that reminder of what it is, I think the problem was nobody could agree on what order any of the things should go in. And so the answer was fine. We'll just let them all use the property assignment syntax, put it in whatever order you want.
This order seems sensible to me. Like message is the first thing you define. If you define a second thing, it'd be the log level with the message. Event ID and message without a log level, I find a little bit weird. But, I mean, yeah, I don't know. I can see it. And these all get.
Well, because if it wasn't attributes, this would be a nonsense ordering of the overloads. String is always present, so it should always be the first parameter. But then once it's in the attribute, well, maybe the event ID should come first because otherwise you're burying the lead. And I think that's the circle we talked ourselves into, and then said, screw it, remove all of them, and just because nothing's required, everything has a fallback. You can do whatever you want in any order, and if they're generally with an attribute, if something's settable in the constructor, it's not settable as a property. And this is violating that.
Yeah, I remember this conversation now too. And string not always being first, changing the order, I get being something you want to avoid.
Right. I mean, we can do it for sugar and say that this one's weird and things, but I think the reason we removed them was those things that I brought up. I don't care a whole lot. I'm just trying to make sure we don't forget why we did what we did and then make a different decision and then remember why and then come back again.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I guess the question is, does it matter as much when they're all different types, except for event name? Yeah, I mean, but that's not any of these constructors.
They're not, they don't introduce an ambiguity when you do things, but it's you look through the IntelliSense and it's not that something's building on something else. It's you start over and read the thing again. It's just basically not the way to do things.
You basically have two method groups, right? The one that starts with an int and the one that doesn't start with an int, right? That's effectively the model here. But I think
they're actually all unique method groups because they keep inserting parameters in front of message.
Yeah, I guess that's another way to.
So every time you add a new parameter, you have to stop and think about what it's doing again.
Yeah.
Maybe, yeah, I don't know.
I mean, in a sense, that kind of makes sense though, right? Because it's the logger message attribute, so you always have a message, and then you may have additional things.
Yeah, I'm just learning, just listening. Yeah, very good.
What if message was always first? I don't know. I actually don't think that's that bad, but then that's no longer the original proposal.
No, I'm not saying that should be. I'm just saying your mental model is there's always going to be a message, right? But it's usually the longest argument, probably, right? So making that last makes sense. Then you just insert more data in front of it, which refines your message, which in that sense, yeah, everything is a unique message group. A method group isn't necessarily the wrong mental model here. I mean, it's not ideal. The problem is if we add one more property here, how do you do that? But I can buy the argument that if you look at the expanded version on screen, it's clearly ridiculous. It's not horrible, but it's not far off from being horrible.
I guess like one issue is if I was writing this in Visual Studio with IntelliSense and I decided that I want a log level and I start typing that, like, would you then not see the overload with event ID? Like, I mean, it doesn't seem like that big of a deal to me.
So I was sorry, I was gone for a while. Part of this has already been approved. How long have we been talking about this one? Let me ask
Well,
that.
I think the quick summary is we originally approved it without the constructors. I think the constructors were in the proposal. We removed them because we couldn't quite agree on the order, and then we said screw it. They're all optional parameters, and you can set them in any order. And I think your motivation to bring the constructors back, kind of thing, is that it's ugly when you do that.
Yep, we already went through this part, and we agreed to add one constructor that took event ID, log level, and message. So if you look at the bottom of this issue.
Oh, so we're talking about the wrong part.
Yes.
So
Sorry, I was gone. I was talking to somebody else. So if you scroll up one there, we already approved that.
Oh, that was Jeremy's fault.
To add, no, it wasn't a fault. I like
No.
that approval.
No, I'm saying it's his fault for not remembering.
Oh, sorry. No, I don't blame him. It's a month and a half ago. And so the only reason this got put back up is because Pranav was asking, it's really important to add event name to the attribute. And the reason being is because right now the way logger message works is it takes the method name that you have and it uses that as the event name. And in ASP.NET, you never want to change the event name once you ship it, because like people will be querying based on those event names. It's like a public thing. And so what he was requesting is to add one more constructor that also takes the event name. So if you scroll down,
so this guy here,
right there. And so my opinion on this, maybe I should have put it on there, but my opinion on this is I don't think we need to add this constructor. You already have this one, and all you have to do is go comma event name equals blah, and just ASP.NET just uses that everywhere.
Yeah,
Like,
I mean the one proposed we should not do with the one that was already approved, because
Right.
it changes the third parameter, which is still a string, to have a different meaning.
Agreed, 100% agreed.
So
I-
no, because they actually are different orders of, like, the first order is also different, right? One has an int, the other one is a level, then is a level
Okay,
and an int.
it flipped the
Oh.
first two. Okay.
But like it's also
I didn't
not
know
great.
that's how he was proposed. I don't like that either.
So yeah, I mean we should just pick an order and then stick to that order.
So my opinion on this is we should leave what's already been approved and not do this new overload at all, because I think you can just do comma event name equals blah in ASP.NET code, and the typical developer is perfectly fine with using the method name as the event name.
I guess that's my question, right? Like if we expect that we want everybody to specify it in code, then you could also go the opposite route, right? You could just say the existing one we just modify and forcing you to pass in an event name, right?
I think I need to talk to Pranav about this. Like, I'm wondering why we don't rename attribute and methods to match what we've already shipped, but there's probably more going on there.
So-
I mean, go ahead.
In the PR, so the where this came up from the first time was me trying to use the logging source generator in ASP.NET code, and I got at least 2 comments that we shouldn't be relying on the name of the method for the event name, because somebody could just rename that method and now it's not obvious that that's a breaking change, because it's just a private internal method.
So when you say it's a breaking change, it just means the telemetry that is sent back is now coming with a different name, right?
Right, but for ASP.NET code, like the ASP.NET proper code, like that's considered a breaking change, because it's users rely on those event names.
The
I
telemetry
would
breaking
argue-
change.
Yeah, to me,
A
it's,
breaking change.
I mean, it's a breaking change in the same way that, renaming your property in JSON to a different thing is a breaking change if you haven't specified the name, right? But like, I mean, I'm kind of like, I don't know, like, do people understand what they're doing here? Because I mean, you're fundamentally defining a method that is supposed to send data over the wire, right? So it's the same way that if I design a JSON object as being serialized, yeah, I mean, unless I specify a name, I would assume it uses the name of the method, right? That seems like a
Right.
somewhat straightforward conclusion to draw. And then, yeah, if you rename
So-
that thing, then it will be named differently. But even that, I mean, in your telemetry queries, you can trivially like just fix your query to take the old name and the new name in case you really messed up, right? Like it's not like the
For-
world is ending.
I don't
For normal
see-
app developers, that's totally fine. But for ASP.NET, like code in the ASP.NET libraries, right? Microsoft ASP.NET libraries is different.
That's what
That's what that's what I'm talking about here when I say ASP.NET proper, like actual code that like Stefan writes or Fowler writes or Pranav writes.
Any library code that uses the loggers, right? Like there's no reason to change event names, like if you don't have to. And I can get that people don't normally see changing like private or internal method names is breaking. I think if they get used to using this attribute, like, yeah. But I see how passing it explicitly makes that more clear. No, I don't think it should be an explicit argument. If Pranav wants to always specify the event name as a string to make sure it's obvious that changing it is breaking, I think we can do event name equals.
I mean, my problem with that is like if so, yeah, that's why I kind of saying like if you want people to force it in, you know, if the only thing they do is they say name of and then the name of the method, then it's not really clear that that's better because then they just basically have the same problem. Now it's just with more syntax, right? They still rename it and then it's like, oh, conveniently it's renamed in both places. That's awesome.
On the PR, they said previously when we were using just logger.define method, somebody first tried doing name of and then they changed it to hard-coded strings.
Right.
Before I even came along, right? And so it was already this well-defined thing inside ASP.NET that when you make logger messages, you use a hard-coded string. You don't use name of, you don't use the name of, you know, the method name, etc. I put the comment in the chat if anybody's interested.
But if that's the case, then yeah, I guess my question still stands is like, why are we still defaulting this at all? Like, if we strongly believe this is the wrong thing to do, then just don't have it defaulted.
It's not.
For
Like,
ASP.NET developers, like for Stefan and Fowler and Pranav, it's the wrong thing to do. But for 99% of the developers in the world, it's not the wrong thing to do.
Okay, and frankly, this is like library developers shouldn't be changing event names if they don't have to, because like, why are you moving cheese? I agree that it's not as bad as like binary breaking changes in runtime code typically, because less people tend to rely on like exact event names. Event ID would arguably be better, right? If you're gonna like filter on a specific message type in your listener or whatever, or whatever's looking at the logs output. But anyway, yeah, I think it should be a separate property too. Like we have our workaround. It can be event name, and yeah, the real argument is like, what's good for a multi-contributor repo as well, right? So there's multiple things. Like if you're writing your own web application, you don't care as much about the event name because you know who's looking at your logs and what depends on it. And if you have a better name because you want to rename a method, then fine. But for library code, you should keep the event name the same whenever possible. I don't think that's just an ASP.NET thing, right? Like anyone who's using our loggers in a library should keep the event name if they can. I don't think that requires it being a string. I understand that there are people on the ASP.NET team who might disagree with me.
So then I guess my question then becomes, so basically what you're saying is it should be optional because some people care, some people don't care. And then for the ones that care, it doesn't really matter whether it's a constructor parameter or an optional property you can initialize or not, right? But like it seems like almost for within ASP.NET you want an analyzer that just says thou shall not initialize this thing to static string, right? And at that point when you have to analyze, it doesn't really matter whether you check for the property assignment or whether you check for the constructor parameter, right?
Yep.
Like I actually,
in retrospect, this should have just been a different issue.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of the problem that we have is that what I tell people is like update the root because that's where we keep looking usually. because we don't
Oh,
really look at the last comments. I mean, it's fine to do that, but like, yeah, without you here, we would have approved the wrong thing.
Yeah. Where were you guys going?
We were
Approving
basically
all the
we
constructors
were
we
basically just
rejected.
saying like, okay, this is the one that's being proposed, so let's talk about that.
Yeah. So we were reminding ourselves all the reasons we said no previously.
Right.
And then we talked ourselves into maybe saying yes. So
We're
I
like,
mean,
well, if they're coming back, they must really want it.
yeah, that was basically my takeaway. It's like, okay, they really want this. But okay, so then basically what I'm hearing is you would reject this, but we shouldn't close this one because we can't, right? Because that's auto tracking the other thing. So I guess
The other thing's already in.
uh,
Like the first thing that was approved right there on May 13th, that's already in.
sure. Like in that case, yeah, I'm fine
Really?
with closing it.
Yeah, I just used it this morning.
Yeah, just it didn't get linked back into this issue.
Yeah, I don't know why this issue didn't get closed in the first place. Like Miriam's got it right there 12 days ago.
Did it use addresses instead
Probably
of
just
fixed or
mentioned.
Yeah,
something?
Maybe it didn't say fixes in the commit message.
Contributes to.
Probably,
Yeah.
yeah. It's not linked here. Oh. I guess. Yeah, I mean, I'm fine with closing it. Like, if we're done with this.
Yeah, the approved work's already done. So
And we're not adding a new overload. A new overload that takes event name, right? That's kind of what we decided.
Yeah.
correct.
Some weird bookkeeping. You still make it API approved because the original thing that we approved is still approved.
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, we could just close it at this point and say, like, you know, the part that we approved is completed, right? That would be basically the way to frame that.
Right, and the new proposal is rejected. The additional.
Yeah.
It's going to be a lot of event name equals an AS Connect core, but I think it'll be fine.
Isn't that what the sort generator is supposed to solve? I'm joking. I know that this is the stub that the user has to type, but yeah. Maybe we should have a source generator for the stubs of the source generator.
I mean that's what this was trying to address, right? It was just trying to remove a bunch of event name equals from ASP.NET source code, I'm sure. But like
the other part that is weird is like event ID goes first, and then you do log level and message, and then event name is last, or not necessarily last, but after a log level and message. Because like event ID and event name are kind of together in a tuple, right? Called event ID.
Yeah, that's a good point, and that's probably why they Pranav ordered it the weird way, where event ID was normally first with the other overload.
Right, that's what he says with the edit tweaked a little bit more closely to resemble the shape of logger message.define.
I just think even though we're going to heavily probably put event name equals in the AS Connect core repo, the use case is niche enough that, like, I don't know, maybe I feel like we could live with that pain.
I think most developers aren't going to put event name in the attribute.
Right. I could agree.
Okay, so here is what I have typed, and you can tell me whether you agree with that.
I will say, like, the analyzer thing is kind of orthogonal to whether the constructor exists. Like, it's a good point, but
it is orthogonal, right? But like, I mean, maybe I'm reading too much into it. Like, I think the way I read pranav suggestion is like by making it a constructor, people think about it. And I guess my argument would be, well, that's probably not enough anyways. So if you really care about not messing this up, you would have an analyzer, and then it wouldn't matter whether you had a constructor or not. If the argument is purely from an aesthetic standpoint, then yes, it's orthogonal.
I don't even think the analyzer has value outside the ASP.NET repository.
Yeah, I mean, you could argue
Right.
that if a library author that does telemetry, it would equally apply to you, but sure.
I mean, maybe
I
like
wouldn't
it's
shift to the analyzer.
I would one of the analyzers that would be inbox but off by default, right? And then you would have to opt into that. Some of our perf analyzers, right? Where it's like, yeah, some code cares, most code probably doesn't, so it's off.
Can a source generator look at like editor config? Or whatever the things are that enables analyzers? Because the source generator is half analyzer, half generate code, right?
Yeah, so you go through the same pipeline, right? So the idea is that an analyzer or generator for that matter just raises the diagnostic that it wants, and then Rosin may or may not suppress them based on editor config settings, right? And I feel like that's I think how that works. So you would always
And you
raise
can tell what it's a default. You raise it, but you say like this is a none. And then the editor config says, oh, now it's an error because ASP.NET thinks it's an error if you don't specify event name.
Yeah, basically, you're the analyzer author, you never have to look at editor config. The infrastructure does it for you. You just raise it with the default diagnostic that you have, which might be hidden or, info or something, right? And then Rosin, when it reports it, included the editor configuration to set it to whatever it was meant to be, which includes off or a higher diagnostic level.
Okay.
And it also handles like pragmas and other stuff, right? So in that sense, yeah, it will just work.
So that's kind of where, if we were to do the analyzer, that I would assume we would just do it in the event, in this logger message source generator.
Yeah.
And you just mark it hidden by default.
Yep.
The analyzer ASP.NET wants isn't exactly that, though, and it's not something I'm sure we could write, right? What we want is to treat these private, like, logger message names as like public API that we're not allowed to change, right? And whether or not we use the event name attribute or not, like, or event name parameter or not, like, we're relying on code reviewers being like, oh, this already had a value, don't change it.
Right, because you could use name of, and it would satisfy the attribute, and it would satisfy the analyzer, right? Because it's like, oh yeah, that's a constant string, but that's still not the right thing to do.
Yeah, I mean, I was about to type this in. I mean, like I said literal, but yeah, I had the same thought. Like you would have to special case name of probably, but I think the larger point that Stefan was making is also true. Is like you can't change the signature, right? You can't change any of the arguments that you pass in because, well, that's telemetry you're sending back. So yeah, you can't easily do that in a analyzer unless you rebuild what we do with the platform compat one. Sorry, the API compatibility one, right, where we kind of compare with the previous version of your library or something, right?
Like,
so
my opinion, and I'll have to talk to Pranav about it, is that really ASP.NET, like, assuming that there aren't names that can't be satisfied with method names, we're relying on reviewers to not change these logger defines anyway, like code reviewers.
But then, dumb question, why would you not just put all the stuff literally into a namespace that you call blah blah blah, but you actually make them public APIs to basically make sure that your normal tracking of API breaking changes would catch it if you mess that up?
It's an interesting thought. I don't think we wanted to ship like actual methods that people.
Well, I mean, I would just mark the type that are browsable never or something, right? Because you don't want the noise in IntelliSense, right? But if you strongly feel these are effectively public APIs because you can't touch them, well then model naming as privates basically make sure that none of our default tooling will be able to help you. So, and if you just invert that and say, screw it, they're public APIs, so you don't get to add or remove parameters from that or rename them or whatever, right? That seems reasonable.
It's an interesting thought. Yeah, just it seems unnecessary to actually make it like callable, even if it's not browsable from third-party.
It feels like a hack. It feels like a hack to you have a hammer, so make this thing into a nail so you can use your hammer.
But you're right. Basically, you want like the public API, like shipped, unshipped kind of stuff for this. So you're making a conscious decision. It's not even that we would never change them. Like sometimes you do. Like sometimes messages get deleted or changed, but we want to be thoughtful about it.
I mean, in a sense, right? These APIs are the representation of the telemetry data shape that we guarantee we ship, right? So in that sense, they are the public API, right? So I don't think it's actually that much of a hack.
So what I did in my PR is I made them const strings, and then I put a comment above them saying using a const string, so that way they don't get renamed when we do code refactoring, because we don't want to break consumers.
Right.
I don't know. That's not gonna, it's not gonna protect us if somebody actually does go in and change them, right? But hopefully somebody sees the comment that says the reason I've hard coded these strings is because we don't want them to change.
Right. All right. But it seems like at least we're in agreement that we wouldn't do this one, so we will close this one, and then whether we do the analyzer, I think, is orthogonal. All right, so unless there's more, then I will call it a day.
Sounds good. Talk to you guys later.
See you later. Bye, everyone online.